Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to untangle a pretty dense, highly opinionated market forecast. We need to figure out exactly how escalating global conflicts and massive AI energy demands are actually interconnected dominoes, and how they're driving the entire economy right now. So let's just jump right in.
To make sense of this massive data dump, we're going to follow the chain reaction across 5 critical sectors. We're looking at geopolitical shocks in oil, inflation in the Fed, traditional finance, crypto meeting institutional money, and finally, AI power and infrastructure.
Starting with Section 1, Geopolitical Shocks and Oil. Our very first domino falls right in the Middle East, setting a baseline of tension for the entire global market.
Closed until further notice. That was the message on Saturday, July 12th. Following U.S. strikes and a warning shot by the IRGC, Iran declared the absolutely critical Strait of Hormuz closed. And according to the newsletter we're analyzing today, this prompted the U.S. to declare the previous ceasefire completely over. I mean, this is a massive, massive geopolitical shock to the system.
And the author points out that this shock is actually compounded by Iran naming Mojtaba Khamenei as the new supreme leader. He's widely viewed as a hardliner with much closer ties to the IRGC, which honestly makes the path to any sort of durable nuclear deal significantly harder. Plus, even though OPEC Plus announced a 188,000 barrel per day production increase, well, that's completely overwhelmed by the Strait being shut down. It's just a drop in the bucket now.
So what's the immediate market reaction? Boom, $76. Directly because of that closure, WTI oil immediately spiked right back towards $76 a barrel. The newsletter notes that this entirely validates their bullish stance on energy stocks, specifically mentioning XLE and DVN, because they act as a direct hedge against exactly this kind of geopolitical chaos.
Moving on to Section 2, Inflation and Fed Testimony. This brings us to our second domino, how a sudden oil price spike directly clashes with the Federal Reserve's ongoing battle against inflation.
There's this incredible timing conflict playing out right now. Tuesday's highly anticipated June CPI is actually expected to show deflation, with a headline of 3.8%. But that's largely because of earlier oil price drops back during the brief ceasefire. The July reality, though? Fresh oil spikes from a reclosed Strait. That completely complicates what the Fed is going to do next. We are essentially looking at a tale of 2 totally different economic realities just colliding in real time.
Which leads us to the billion-dollar question. What actually triggers a rate hike now? This exact tension sets the perfect stage for Federal Reserve Chair Warsh. He has famously refused to give forward guidance, and now he faces intense questioning from Congress, with soft inflation data in one hand and a closed Strait of Hormuz in the other.
And get this, he isn't just fighting external pressures. The newsletter notes that recent FOMC minutes revealed a deeply divided committee. Warsh himself actually called it a family fight. With 9 out of 18 Fed officials projecting a rate hike, his upcoming congressional testimony basically becomes an agonizing game of 5-dimensional chess. Every single word he says is going to be meticulously parsed by the markets.
All of this builds up to an absolutely wild Tuesday morning. At 8:30 a.m., that June CPI data drops. At 9 a.m., big bank Q2 earnings hit pre-market. And then at 10 a.m., Fed Chair Warsh begins his House testimony. Our source calls this a Tuesday morning triple header. Honestly, it's arguably the most information-dense 90 minutes of 2026. This is the exact moment where the prepared investor wins and the distracted one just gets run over.
All right, Section 3, Traditional Finance and Earnings. Smack in the middle of that crazy timeline is our third domino, traditional finance checking the actual real-time temperature of the U.S. consumer.
We're expecting massive Q2 earnings from banking heavyweights like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Bank of America. These numbers, they act as the ultimate canary in the coal mine. Look, if JP Morgan flags credit quality issues, it means consumers are finally cracking under that 3.8% inflation. But if Bank of America shows strong consumer health, well, it means the economy is holding strong despite all these shocks. It is literally a real-time stress test. Section 4, Crypto meets institutional money. As those traditional banks report their earnings, our fourth domino reveals how they are simultaneously trying to overhaul their own aging infrastructure. And how are they doing it? By borrowing straight from the crypto playbook. According to the report, TradFi is rapidly bridging the gap to blockchain. Swift is piloting 24/7 tokenized deposits with 17 major banks. They are essentially building stablecoin-style rails for a $400 trillion network. Meanwhile, you've got New Hampshire testing $100 million in Bitcoin-backed public finance bonds, basically treating crypto as actual debt collateral. And even Ethereum is stepping up, announcing a multi-year lean rebuild for quantum safety. This infrastructure convergence is happening right before our eyes.
Now, the crucial point here is that institutional adoption heavily relies on clear rules. And that all hinges on the looming August 7th deadline for the Clarity Act. This is the legislation aiming to legally define commodities and stablecoins. Because let's face it, without it, major institutions like pension funds and endowments are just stuck guessing the rulebook, and they hate guessing.
Yet, despite those regulatory gray areas, institutional appetite is aggressively returning. We're talking to the tune of $221.7 million. That was a massive single-day inflow to Bitcoin ETFs, and it snapped a really brutal 10-day losing streak. The newsletter highlights this as exactly the structural, institutional signal the market has been desperately waiting for.
And that brings us to Section 5, AI, Power, and Infrastructure. Finally, our last domino connects all this global capital straight into the physical grid. We're talking about the relentless, massive power demands of artificial intelligence.
The newsletter tracks high-momentum AI infrastructure plays like Sharon AI. They surged 18.5% on NVIDIA deal momentum and feature $2.2 billion in contracted revenue. But the author notes a really critical physical bottleneck here. These hyperscalers have an enormous problem. They need absolutely unprecedented amounts of electricity to run all of this stuff.
So how do they solve this energy crisis? Enter Brookfield Renewable Partners, or BEP. They're one of the world's largest pure-play renewable electricity generators. You see, because tech giants like Microsoft and Google have very strict net zero carbon commitments, they can't just burn fossil fuels to power their AI. They're forced to sign massive, multi-decade power purchase agreements with green power companies exactly like Brookfield. To put this incredible scale into perspective, Brookfield already operates 47 gigawatts of capacity. That is enough to power 35 million homes. But their development pipeline, it is a staggering 200 gigawatts. That's more than 4 times their current operating size, uniquely positioning them to feed the AI beast for decades to come.
The author argues this makes Brookfield the ultimate picks and shovels AI trade. It offers a relatively safe 4.6% yield, backed by the most creditworthy tech companies on Earth. But of course there's a catch. This works beautifully provided interest rates don't spike, which, you guessed it, ties us right back to our Fed chair domino and all that critical Tuesday inflation data.
And that brings us full circle to the fundamental tension in the market right now. Look at the setup. The S&P 500 is up 9.3% year-to-date, sitting remarkably near all-time highs. But the reality? It's a total minefield of macro and geopolitical shocks. We've got closed straits, a hawkish Fed, and fracturing peace deals. It's an absolute tightrope walk.
So how do you actually survive a market like that? Well, the Source newsletter claims their portfolio is up roughly 20% year-to-date, generating nearly 11% alpha over the broader market. They've navigated war, fractured peace deals, and wild sector rotations just by understanding this domino effect. Their strategy is pretty straightforward. Stay anchored by energy hedges for those geopolitical shocks, all while riding the structural, multi-year tailwinds of AI infrastructure.
But all of this leaves us with one final, genuinely fascinating thought to consider as Tuesday's data-heavy triple header unfolds. Think about it. If the system can absorb war, inflation, and rate shocks while still sitting at all-time highs, what happens when the dominoes fall the other way? What happens if the data actually turns positive? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep your eyes on the data, and I'll catch you next time.